Optimized my bottlenecks, removed redundant pointer checks. The database's sub-selects are indexed to a T. They shaved the microseconds down till there was nothing left to count. I instantaneously found the answer in a breeze. But I've been feeling so alone. Nobody here is calling from a function or a phone. If I'm dead code, let me die.
It's the Monday Morning Show. Today is June 29th, 2015. I'm Ken LaSalle. That's Josh Woodward singing Dead Code. You can find out more about Josh at joshwoodward.com. You can find out more about me at kenlasalle.com. For 1 year now, this podcast has been coming at you every Monday morning. Except one, I think, when my computer died. So basically, I've greeted you with those words 51 times. Now, I think I'm going to take a couple weeks off to reward myself, but before I do, I'd like to go over a few things, all related this week to hate and fear. Hate and fear. They're basically the same thing. We hate what we fear, and we fear what we hate. We don't even have a whole lot of control over it. If you're afraid of something, you're not going to cuddle up with it. And conversely, if you hate something, there is that pressure on the base of your lizard brain telling you to fear it. And so it goes. This week, we saw a lot of change in our country about things many of us have feared and hated. Let's begin with the Confederacy, something most of my listeners who are over 150 years old will probably remember. Yes, the Civil War might have ended at the Appomattox Courthouse on April 9, 1865, but we've continued fighting it as a nation ever since. We fought against Jim Crow, we fought against lynchings and the Klan. We as a nation have continued to fight this war, a war over the quality of human grace, over our acceptance of the inherent dignity of a human being, regardless of where they come from or what they look like, ever since. Last week, just another salvo was fired. Actually, 9 salvos. When a white racist asshole walked into a Charleston, North Carolina church and brutally murdered 9 people who didn't realize that they would be the next 9 casualties in this war. Since then, some cooler, more rational heads have prevailed, and it looks like the so-called Confederate flag, which may not have been the symbol of the Confederacy, but it certainly was the symbol of what it became, is being taken down and put aside, only to be remembered, it is my hope, among other American travesties such as our slaughter of the Indians, our rape of the planet, and reality TV. Well, I can hope. On the very day our president delivered his eulogy over these poor victims of hate and fear, the Supreme Court finally ruled in favor of, well, some would say in favor of love, but I would say they ruled in favor of common decency and fairness, when they finally made it legal for adult Americans to marry whatever other adult American they like. Marriage equality is long overdue, and this ruling has also been met with hate and fear. And hate and fear over what? All because we have religions that tell us that some delusional idea that nobody has any evidence of or proof of is going to lose his shit if you put your pee-pee where they don't approve. People opposed to marriage equality are idiots with the minds of children, nothing more. And yet, we have to understand that many of them vote. So it is up to us, rational thinking folk, not just to insult them, though there is that, but also to show them that equality is not a bad thing. Now, there will still be a lot of people who don't understand common decency, and to those people I say, drop dead, you stupid fucks. Oh, and in case you haven't noticed, this podcast is going to be changing very soon. More on that in a moment. But first, back to hate and fear. This time, let's talk about hate and fear on the world stage. Because there's more than enough to go around. For America, our greatest hatred and fear is presently directed at ISIS, and oddly enough, at Russia. Why Russia? Because for about a year now, Russians and Americans have been caught up in this paranoid kind of role play in which both are evil empires trying to invade and kill and slaughter. I wish I was exaggerating, but look, this all began because of the Ukraine. You can say it was because Russia invaded, or because pro-Russian dissidents rebelled, or because they found Waldo. It doesn't really matter why, because it all comes down to one thing: fighting. As usual, both sides refer to the other in terms of their inhumanity, their barbarism, their hate. With the U.S. on NATO's side and Russia on theirs, rather than work together to resolve this, all we do is escalate, escalate, escalate. Russia claims that the United States is waging economic war when the U.S. pushes for more economic sanctions. The United States claims that Russia is using Cold War tactics when they push their newly expanded army against the border. More and more, both armies are pushed to a heightened state of readiness to protect themselves against people they increasingly see as the enemy. Under conditions like that, somebody is going to shoot. Now, are they the enemy? Either side? They don't have to be. All they need is the will to sit down together and work it out. But it's easier to swing the war rhetoric around, and besides, it gets more votes. Politicians are the only ones who thrive in this atmosphere, and thrive they do. Putin becomes increasingly popular. Obama looks tough. It's great for everyone except those caught in the middle, and those people are you and me. Rather than back off the rhetoric of hate and fear, it just goes up and up. Arms manufacturers make a killing, and they make a lot of money as well. Government-run media in Russia benefits, and our so-called private media, if you can call anything funded by corporations who stand to make a lot of money off of war private, fans the flames of fear 24 hours a day. And what of ISIS? What of those few thousand neighborhood thugs in the Middle East armed with pea shooters compared to our military? What of our so-called enemy? I keep seeing story after story trying to make people terrified, and I can't help but wonder why. Who benefits from this? Our media tells us we should fear ISIS, but really what they're saying is oil production is going to get more difficult with ISIS around. Of course, oil companies' profit margins might get hurt, and arms companies, as always, stand to make some money as well. Do we even need this oil? Not if we really pursued alternative energy in solar and wind. But the media doesn't mention this because they want the story that's going to bring in the most ratings. So you can see that the profit motive on the parts of the oil companies, the arms industry, and the media keeps us from focusing on how to stop this. Now, let's look at ISIS's side, inasmuch as it's possible for a white atheist in Southern California to do so. Of course, I can understand their motive. The U.S. has done very little to make the disenfranchised of the Middle East, those who make up most of ISIS. We've done very little to make friends, you know. Bombs and terror don't make friends. If we don't like it, why should they? So, the disenfranchised, the poor, the downtrodden, the pissed off band together. I'm sure they see their actions as self-defense. And why shouldn't they? The bottom line, though, is that there's very little they can do to harm us from over there. Can they put a bomb on a plane? Sure, but so can anyone. We have a bad habit in the West of thinking that if someone can do something, then they probably will. If Russia can invade NATO territory, we have to position thousands of troops and tanks on their border. If ISIS could put a bomb on a plane, we have to bomb them even more. Does this make sense? No, of course not. But that's what we do. And it just goes on and on. Does our news industry help us put any of this into context? No. Even though it is their job, even though they're pretty much the only ones who can put the news into context, the rush for ratings has turned our news media, starting with TV news and then trickling down to nearly everyone else, into little more than a fear machine. They specialize in telling you what to fear in their effort to keep you tuned in. But fear and hate aren't qualities that educate us or make us better people. They push us into unnecessary wars. They force us into treating each other poorly. They turn us into nothing more than the worst versions of ourselves. Which I suppose is why for the last year I've been here almost every Monday morning. Well, that and to plug my books. But after a year of podcasts, I think it's time to make a few changes. So I'm going to take a couple of weeks off to retool this machine and get it ready for year 2. The cool thing for the week is what I'll be doing with the next 2 weeks as I take a little time off from talking with you fine people. You see, since I was a boy, I've loved comedy. I've loved making people laugh. That's why I wrote so many plays, because I loved watching an audience laugh. That's why I try and drop humor into every book I write. Now, I'm moving into the next phase, and for the next few weeks, I'm going to be recording my first comedy album under the auspices of The Third Wall. I spent the last few months writing it and even more time plotting it out. Now comes the fun part. This is, if only in a very small way, my tribute to the Firesign Theater, my way of carrying on their memory with my own take on theater of the mind comedy. You'll hear more about that when I return on July 20th. This episode is brought to you by Wormfood Island, coming in July from Vagabondage Press. Are you ready for a new kind of zombie? The kind that isn't mindless? The kind that's hungry for much more than just flesh? Wormfood Island is the story of a family on the verge of collapse. When they win a trip to a hedonism resort out of the country, Kevin Miller hopes this is the chance they need to save their marriage. But instead, they find themselves quickly facing a quest for survival against an infestation of parasitic worms that cause the infected to gain enormous sexual appetites, which quickly turns into an appetite for living flesh. Look for Wormfood Island in ebook and paperback in July on Amazon and wherever books are sold online. And that's the Monday Morning Show for June 29th, 2015. Be sure to check back next week for another episode. Head on down to kenlasalle.com for all the latest. You can find my ebooks, paperbacks, and audiobooks all over, etc., etc., etc. You have yourself a terrific week. Be good to yourself. Be kind to others. Let's make this world a better place.
Nobody here has called me from a function or a phone. If I'm dead, code, let me die, 'cause I'm only wasting memory alive. If I'm dead, code, wipe the drive, 'cause I'd rather be a memory than a ghost who's still alive.